The sky changed that day not with fire or storms, but with silence and awe across every continent. The clouds pulled apart like curtains, and behind them hung a single alien ship so large it made mountains look small. It drifted into Earth's orbit. Without warning, without communication, and without any display of weapons or light, but its sheer size and presence created a wave of panic across the globe. People ran to shelters, governments scrambled jets, cities went on lockdown, and satellites watched closely while the ship remained still like a beast sleeping in the dark of space. No one understood its purpose, and everyone feared the worst. This was not the first time Earth had seen alien visitors, but never before had a ship of this scale arrived, and never from this species. The name whispered in underground networks and across secret intelligence circles was the Varaka race, known across the galaxy, not for peace, not for trade, but for destruction. The Varak were the oldest warriors in known space. Their empire stretched over 100 systems, and wherever they landed, silence followed. Entire species had vanished under their rule, not because the Varak wanted land or power, but because they saw weakness as disease, and any species that showed emotion or mercy was deemed unworthy to exist. So when the Varak ship lowered a platform toward Earth, every human heart beat with dread. The world expected an ultimatum, a demand, or a declaration of war. But what came instead was quiet, and what came instead changed the future of humanity. On the barren white surface of the landing platform were several small creatures, no taller than an average child, but with silver blue skin and glowing violet eyes. They looked fragile, but every scan proved they were Varak. These were their children, not soldiers, not diplomats, not spies, just young. Beside them, a message appeared in perfect human language, projected into the air and read by every screen on the planet. It said only, "This we give them to you, raise them as your own." No other words, no explanation, no terms, no threats. Confusion swept across every level of society. Earth's leaders debated in secret meetings. Scientists studied the children from afar while drones hovered over them, and the public watched with both fear and curiosity. The question echoed through every home and broadcast: why would the most dangerous species in the galaxy trust humans with their young? Some believed it was a trap, others believed it was an insult, and some few believed it was a test. Among the many who watched from behind their screens was a man named Daniel. He lived a quiet life outside the main cities, in a town where not much ever happened. He had once been a school teacher, but now spent most days alone tending his small garden and reading history. When the global message was repeated a second time, the Varak ship sent small pods to different regions, each carrying one child. Within hours, Earth's authorities realized that the Varak had chosen the guardians themselves without asking, and Daniel was one of them. Heard the knock at his door, and opened it to find a strange glass-like pod resting on his porch. Inside it was a child, its eyes closed, its chest rising and falling with slow, calm breaths, and around its body a soft glow shimmered like a pulse of energy. Daniel stood frozen, unsure if he should call someone or run, or close the door and pretend it was not there. But his instincts pulled him forward as he stepped closer. The pod opened without sound, and the child opened its eyes, its gaze fixed on him without fear or confusion. And in that moment, Daniel felt something strange. It was not danger or threat, but something else, a weight, something ancient and new. At the same time, he picked the child up without thinking and held it in his arms. Its body was warm. Its skin felt like cool silk, and it wrapped its small arms around his neck and rested its head on his shoulder, as if it had always known him. Authorities came within the hour, but did not take the child. Instead, they ran tests and scanned Daniel's house. And when they left, they only said to him, "You've been selected." He asked why, but no one had an answer. Over the next few days, other humans were revealed to have received the Varak children: a woman in a desert town, a farmer in a mountain village, a nurse in a floating city, each one chosen without clear reason, and each one now raising an alien child with no knowledge of why. Daniel named The child Kale, not knowing what the Varak called him, or if they used names at all, the child responded to it with a slow blink and a soft sound, almost like a hum. Kale did not speak, but understood everything quickly, learning gestures, tools, and even the patterns of Daniel's quiet routines. He did not eat the same food, but absorbed sunlight and rested during the night, curled up near Daniel's old dog, who had not barked once since the child arrived. The news covered every moment, speculations, theories, warnings. Some believed these children would grow into weapons. Others believed they were meant to observe and report, but no one knew, and the Varak remained silent. Their ship still floated in orbit, unmoving, unshaken, untouched. Daniel spent his days trying to understand the child, watching how Kale moved, how he stared at birds and clouds, and how he sometimes reached for the stars, as if he missed something far beyond them. He tried to keep a journal, but every time he wrote something down, it felt like words were too small for what was happening. He started speaking to Kale, not because he expected replies, but because it felt right. He told him about the Earth, its people, its mistakes, and its kindness, about wars and peace and stories and hope. And Kale listened, always listened. Some nights, Daniel found the child standing outside looking at the stars, without blinking, as if searching for answers that even he could not name. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel began to feel something. Not fear, not confusion, but purpose, like he was part of something larger than anything he had ever imagined. And though he did not know it yet, the galaxy was watching and waiting, because the deadliest race had made their choice, and now the future rested in the hands of humans who had once thought themselves small. But perhaps the Varak had seen something others had missed, not strength, not something far greater, and far more dangerous, compassion. Kale was not like any child Daniel had ever seen. His movements were quiet, but precise. His eyes held an alertness that never seemed to fade. Even when resting, he showed signs of deep awareness. He didn't speak, but he understood commands, gestures, even emotions. Daniel could tell that Kale was always watching, not just with his eyes, but with something deeper, as if learning the world not just through sight and sound, but through feeling and presence. The first few days were difficult. Kale did not respond to touch at first. He did not accept food or play like a normal child, but he also never cried, never screamed, never caused trouble. He simply watched. Caput adjusted. He moved around Daniel's home with careful steps, touching objects without damaging them, observing books, plants, lights, and the ticking clock with equal interest. Daniel set a soft bed for him beside the window, but Kale preferred to lie on the wooden floor near the door, as if guarding the house or listening to something far away. Neighbors heard about the child and began asking questions. Some were afraid, some were curious, some brought small gifts thinking Kale might need toys or clothes. But the child never accepted anything from anyone except Daniel. Over time, Kale began to mimic some human behaviors. He followed Daniel into the garden each morning. He sat beside him during meals. He touched leaves, ran fingers through soil, stood silently during rain, and stared at fireflies at night without blinking. Daniel spoke to him daily, not expecting replies, but treating him like a student, sharing stories about the world, explaining how things worked, where water came from, why plants grew, and what it meant to be kind. Kale listened without turning away, and sometimes Daniel thought he saw something like understanding in those deep violet eyes. One evening, Daniel told him the story of a bird that lost its home during a storm, and how people helped it build a new one. Kale sat very still through the tale, and later that night Daniel found the child outside picking up twigs and arranging them into strange shapes near the tree, as if trying to build something, or perhaps remembering something from far away. Elsewhere around the world, similar scenes were playing out. Each of the chosen human guardians had received one of the Varak children, and each one described the same behavior: quiet observation, fast learning, no speech, but strong emotional response. A woman named Lena, who was a doctor in a mountain clinic, became one of the first to notice biological changes she had taken in a Varak child named Ari. who showed the same calm and mysterious traits, but after a few weeks, Lena noticed something strange. Ari's skin had started changing, slowly adapting to local temperatures. Colors adjusting slightly to light levels, even showing signs of emotional response through subtle shifts of glow and heat. Lena conducted medical scans and found that the child's nervous system had started forming new connections, ones not typically seen in known Varak biology. It was as if the child's body was evolving not randomly, but in direct response to the human environment. She sent a report to global scientific networks warning them that something more complex was happening than anyone had guessed. The children were not just learning, they were transforming. Back in Daniel's home, Kale began doing things that surprised even the monitoring agencies. One morning, Daniel woke up to find Kale in the kitchen, trying to make tea exactly the way Daniel had done the day before. The child had memorized every motion, every item, every step. Though the result was a mess, it was the effort that shocked Daniel. Later that day, Kale handed Daniel a leaf, not just any leaf, but one Daniel had pointed to a week earlier during a nature walk, explaining how it helped heal wounds. Kale had remembered the shape, the location, the use, and brought it back. It became clear to Daniel that Kale was not just repeating actions, he was choosing, learning, adapting. Daniel started testing limits, giving Kale simple tasks, puzzles, art materials, and even music. The child responded in unexpected ways. His drawings were complex, geometric patterns that mirrored both alien and human designs. His reaction to music was intense. He would sit for long periods with his hand over his chest as if feeling something he didn't know how to express. One day, while walking through the town market, a loud bang startled a nearby group of children. One of them fell and scraped his arm, crying in pain. Kale, who had never shown any sudden reaction before, moved instantly, rushing to the child's side and placing his hand gently over the wound. His hand glowed softly, and the child stopped crying within seconds. People saw it, and the footage spread across social media. Quickly, millions watched as the alien child comforted a human child with kindness, not technology, not command, but pure empathy. The moment became a turning point across the world. People began shifting their views. The children of the Varak were no longer seen as potential threats, but as something new, something born of both fear and hope, something that could become a bridge. But not everyone agreed. Some powerful nations viewed the situation with suspicion. They believed the children were being groomed to infiltrate humanity, or worse, that the Varak had planted them to learn human weaknesses before launching a future attack. Military leaders demanded answers, governments debated behind closed doors, and intelligence agencies increased surveillance. Lena received a private message from an unknown source with access to alien signals. She was shown fragments of intercepted Varak transmissions. Though unclear, they hinted at a deeper reason for the placement of the children. One line stood out: "The old ways are failing. We place our future in their hands, not because they are strong, but because they are different." The meaning was clear. The Varak had grown tired of their path of domination. Their children were not here to observe, but to be changed. Kale continued to grow under Daniel's care, not just physically but emotionally. One night, Daniel found him crying silently with glowing tears, though no reason was clear, and when Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder, Kale leaned into him, not as an alien but as a child. The bond was no longer one of caretaker and guest, but of father and son, and far above them, high in orbit, the Varak ship remained still, silent, watching, and far beyond them, among distant stars, other species began to notice, began to whisper, because something was happening on Earth, something no weapon could destroy. The most dangerous species in the galaxy had given humanity a gift that no empire ever offered, a chance to raise not just children, but a new kind of future. Bond between the human guardians and the Varak children had grown stronger with every passing day in every corner of the planet. Moments were being shared that no one could have imagined just months ago. Alien children, once feared, now sat at dinner tables, learned human customs, listened to stories, and held hands with the very species their ancestors had once called weak but Peace never grows without challenge far beyond Earth's skies across distant systems. Where the Varak name still stirred fear, and silent something began to stir leaders of powerful alien coalitions. Began holding urgent meetings, messages flashed between stars carrying a single question: why had the Varak broken the ancient codes? Why had they allowed their bloodline to mix with a race as unpredictable as humans? The Council of Orin, the ruling voice of multiple systems, declared that the Varak's decision was a violation of galactic protocol, that no species with such power should be allowed to evolve without oversight. Earth became the center of quiet tension. No war was declared, no warning was sent, but ships began to vanish, probes sent to study Earth disappeared without trace, and whispers of a coming strike spread through high-level human intelligence networks. Lena, who had been working closely with human scientists, received a direct alert from an off-world signal station deep in the mountains. A message had been picked up from the edge of the solar system. It came in fragments, but the meaning was chilling. The children must not complete the bond, destroy them before the shift occurs. She brought the message to the Global Council, made up of diplomats, military commanders, and scientific leaders, and they debated for days. Some wanted to send the children away, hide them in bunkers. Others believed it was time to return them to the Varak and avoid war. But Lena stood before them and said, "We were chosen not to protect these children behind walls, but to raise them, to guide them. If we turn our backs now, then everything they've learned from us will be erased." Her words struck a chord. Daniel heard about the signal to his home. Now surrounded with more sensors, guards, and silent drones, Kale remained calm, but Daniel sensed something had changed. The child no longer looked at the sky with wonder, but with awareness, sometimes standing for hours, without moving, just staring into the distance as if hearing things no one else could. One evening, Daniel sat beside Kale in the garden and spoke softly. "Are they coming?" Kale turned to him, eyes glowing faintly. His voice came for the first time not in words, but in a whisper of thought. "They are afraid not of us, but of what we could become." The next day, all guardians reported similar experiences. Their children began communicating in ways not recorded before, not speech, but something deeper, a wave of understanding that filled the mind like light. Kale showed Daniel memories, not in images, but in feelings, memories of the Varak homeworld, burning from endless war, of children taken from families and trained for battle, of a long silence where joy had no place. And then he showed Daniel something new, a vision of harmony, of Varak and human children, walking together, building together, changing something ancient. Daniel understood now. The children were not here just to survive. They were the beginning of a new form of life, something beyond Varak, beyond human, a mix of strength and compassion. But the warning from the stars had not been idly fleet. Entered the edge of Earth's solar system. It moved, slow, deliberate, cloaked in silence, but visible to the right eyes. Lena confirmed it. Air real, and their armed Earths. Military prepared, defensive systems were activated, shields tested, weapons charged. But no one truly believed a war could be won if it came to that. Not against a coalition of ancient species. Still, Earth stood firm. A message was sent to the incoming fleet: "You will not touch them. They are under our care." There was no reply. Tensions rose across every nation. Fear returned to the people. But the Guardians did not hide. Instead, they brought their children to the open, allowed them to be seen by the world news channels, showed moments of laughter, of kindness, of children helping the elderly, healing animals, planting trees. The world saw not monsters, not spies, but lives that had grown with love. Daniel stayed close to Kale each day. They sat and read books, watched the clouds, listened to the wind. Kale now responded to music and sometimes sang without words, just tones that calmed the air. He hugged Daniel for the first time, and it was not just a moment of comfort. It was something shared deep, like two pieces of different worlds touching for the first time. Then, one night, Kale looked up and whispered, "They are near, within hours." The skies changed again. Lights appeared above the ocean's massive Ships hovering silent, threatening, and from them came a message, spoken in hundreds of languages: return them or face removal. But Earth did not return them. Guardians stood before cameras, before soldiers, before governments, and declared their choice. Are not visitors, they are our children. Now people marched in the streets, held hands, formed human walls. Outside shelters, scientists released open studies, proving that children were changing, evolving not into weapons, but into peacekeepers. Then something unexpected happened. A ship broke formation from the fleet. A voice came through: we wish to see what they have become. Permission was granted. A delegation arrived and met Kale and others. They were shown the new bond, the changes, the compassion, the laughter. The delegation returned to the fleet, and silence followed for hours. Finally, a single message arrived: let them be raised, let them be seen. If they choose the human path, perhaps there is still hope. The fleet did not attack it, faded into the stars, leaving Earth untouched. But Earth had been changed. Kale looked at Daniel and said in clear voice for the first time, you gave me what my people never knew, a reason to care. And Daniel held him, knowing the galaxy had just witnessed something greater than war. A warning had come, but what answered it was not force, it was love, it was human. Stars had turned silent once more, but silence after a warning is never peace. Earth had stood its ground, the fleet had withdrawn, but the eyes of the galaxy had not looked away. Every action, every heartbeat, every whisper on Earth was now watched, not just by governments or alien councils, but by civilizations ancient and proud who had never trusted humans with anything more than fear. The Varrock ship still hovered in orbit, unmoving, unchanged, its presence like a monument to something not yet named. It sent no words, made no demands, offered no comfort, but deep inside that ship others watched. Children still waiting for placement, still untouched by Earth's influence, and somewhere in their silent chambers, old Varrock leaders remained unsure of the path their own kind had chosen on Earth. The Guardians continued their quiet work. Kale now spoke, not often, but when he did it was with meaning. Daniel noticed how his tone carried weight, how other children responded to him, as if drawn not by command, but by purpose. The garden behind Daniel's house had changed too. Kale had begun growing strange plants, not of Earth, but born of memory, seeds that had been hidden in the folds of his clothing. Seeds from a world that no longer remembered what growing things felt like. Lena traveled across continents to meet with other scientists and guardians. She spoke in open gatherings to leaders who still doubted, to people who still feared. She brought evidence not just of change but of choice. The children were not just adapting, they were choosing human ways, not out of submission, but out of belief. They sang human songs, told human stories, cried when others were in pain, and smiled when small joys touched their days. Still the threat of return loomed. A second message arrived from the Auran Council, colder than before. We have seen the change, we reject it. If the Varrock refuse to recall their young, we will consider all Guardians enemies of stability. That message was not shared with the public at first, only read behind sealed doors, where military minds weighed options, and diplomatic hands trembled. But Daniel heard it through Lena, and he did not stay silent. He took Kale by the hand, walked into the heart of the capital, and stood before a hall filled with voices that shaped Earth's future. He spoke not with anger, but with truth. He told them about the mornings when Kale would rise before dawn to water the garden, how he would collect stones and place them beside the tree where Daniel's wife had been buried, how he would hold Daniel's hand when the wind howled through the walls and say nothing, just stay close. He told them that Kale was not just learning what it meant to live, he was teaching Daniel what it meant to live again. And when he finished speaking, Kale stepped forward and placed his hand over his own heart, then pointed at Daniel and whispered, "This is my world now." The words spread across every network, every screen across Earth and beyond. People gathered in streets, not with weapons, but with candles and signs, not in anger, but in unity. Families who had never met the children stood side by side in silent support. Artists painted murals of alien children, holding hands with humans. Musicians wrote songs in languages the stars had never heard, and children in schools wrote letters to the Varak saying things like, "We will take care of them. They are safe with us. Let them stay." The Varak ship responded not in words, but in light. A beam shone down upon each guardian's home, and from it descended small metallic stones glowing. Softly Daniel received one, and when he touched it a voice entered his mind, a voice not of Kale, but of one older. "We have seen your hearts. We will not stop you, but we cannot protect you." The meaning was clear. From this moment forward the guardians were on their own. That night Kale sat with Daniel under the stars, his eyes reflecting constellations, and silence stretched between them, not empty but full. Then Kale said, "They fear what they do not understand, and they hate what they fear." Daniel nodded and replied, "Then we helped them understand across the world plans were made not for war, but for something more powerful." Earth opened its first center for galactic integration, not built in a fortress or a government hall, but in a quiet forest, where the first Varak children had walked with their human guardians. Inside its walls were stories, not weapons, art, not command, science rooted in feeling, not control. And the children led it. Kale gave speeches not in human words, but in emotion. Sent through simple shared experiences, he told of the cold halls of the Varak ships, of the loneliness of his first days, and of the day Daniel gave him a cup of warm tea with no questions asked. That moment, he said, changed his path. The council of Aran did not attack, but they responded. In other ways, their ships no longer came close, but their trade was cut, their ambassadors withdrew, their message was clear. They would not destroy, but they would isolate. Earth became alone in the galactic map, but not in the hearts of those who had seen what grew within its people. Other smaller species began to ask questions. They too had suffered under systems of control. They too wondered if perhaps humans held something rare, not in technology, but in the soul. And the children kept growing. Kale had become taller, his voice stronger, his steps more confident, but he never lost the softness that had bloomed in Daniel's home. He cared for others deeply, learned languages quickly, and laughed at small things like wind chimes and soap bubbles. Daniel watched him and wondered what kind of future Kale would choose, and if the galaxy would be ready for it. He knew one thing: Earth had made a stand, not by force, but by refusing to give up on a single child, and now that stand had echoed farther than any weapon ever could. Seasons changed across Earth's skies, grew warmer in one half of the world, colder in the other, but the children continued to grow. No longer were they just guests or symbols or mysteries. They had become part of daily life. Their presence no longer brought fear, only quiet wonder. Kale walked beside Daniel through the fields where crops had been planted by hand, his hands no longer small, his steps no longer uncertain. His voice deeper, now still soft but steady and calm. His eyes still held the violet light of his people, but now it blended with something else. A warmth that came not from biology, but from the spirit of the life he had lived here. The world had accepted the children, and the children had accepted the world, and yet far beyond. Earth stars still held their silence, old powers still watched and waited. The Aran Council no longer sent messages, no longer sent ships, but everyone knew they had not forgotten. They simply waited to see if the human experiment would collapse, if the bond would break, if the children would turn against their guardians. When the time came, that time arrived sooner than expected. One night, without warning, the Varak ship that had remained still for years began to move. Its engines came to life. Its shape shifted, not in aggression, but in purpose, and it sent one final signal to Earth. One last message that reached every satellite, every screen, every station across the planet. The last group has awakened. They are ready. We cannot guide them. Only you can decide what they become. And then the ship released a group of children, nearly 300 young Varak, still untouched by human hands, still raw in behavior, still carrying the full instincts of the old way. They descended not in pods but in silence, landing across several chosen places, guarded but open. Daniel watched the footage as the children emerged, their eyes sharper, their movements Quicker, their presence heavy, not with threat, but with unshaped power. One of them arrived near Daniel's town and stood at the edge of the field where Kale once played. The child did not speak, did not move closer, just waited. Kale walked toward him and stood quietly, not speaking with words, but simply being there. The younger one blinked several times, then copied Kale's breathing, then his stance, then finally his stillness. Something passed between them, not seen by the eyes, not heard by the ears, something ancient and new at the same time. Across the world similar moments happened, each child from the final group placed near the original guardians and their older Varrock children, and in every case the same pattern appeared. Younger ones mirrored the older ones, not as soldiers follow leaders, but as students follow something they never knew they needed. Slowly they began to eat with humans, walk beside animals, to touch plants with curiosity. Instead of indifference, the transformation had begun again, but not everyone welcomed it. A human faction formed, one that feared the children might multiply too fast or grow too powerful. Some believed the older Varrock were manipulating the humans, using the bond as a long-term plan for dominance. They gathered supporters, launched messages online, even attacked one of the integration centers with fire and chaos. No lives were lost, but the world shook with tension. Kale spoke on the largest human broadcast, not with emotion, but with truth. He explained that his kind had once been born into war, taught only survival and strength and silence, but here they had learned other things. Kindness was not weakness. Love was not a flaw. To protect was not to control. He said, if you fear what we might become, then help us become better. Do not abandon us to our old path again. His words reached billions. The protests died down, not because everyone agreed, but because everyone began to feel the weight of their own responsibility. The truth was simple. The children would become what they were raised to be, and Earth had to choose. Daniel met with Lena and the other guardians in a global gathering, the first of its kind. It was held not in a city, but in the forests, where no walls stood between them and the stars above. There they made the decision together. They would not treat the younger Varrock as threats or test subjects. They would treat them as they had treated the first ones. With guidance, with love, with boundaries and trust. They opened new home schools, gardens, built not like human cities, but like shared places where cultures could grow without crushing each other. The younger ones responded quickly. Their aggression melted, not with control, but with attention. Their eyes softened when hugged. Their bodies adapted again, just as the first children had done. Time moved forward. Kale began teaching at one of the shared schools, guiding younger Varrock and human children alike. His lessons simple, his voice calm, but his presence powerful. He taught them not how to fight, but how to listen, not how to win, but how to build. Daniel grew older, watched from his chair near the window, watched the world he once feared grow into something strange and beautiful. One evening Kale returned from teaching, sat beside him and said, "They offered me a place on the Varrock Council. They want me to speak for Earth." Daniel looked at him with tired eyes and smiled. "Then speak the way you always have, with your heart." Kale nodded and took his hand, not as a student, not as an alien, but as a son. Years passed. The stars above no longer ignored Earth. Other species began to visit, not in fear, but in curiosity. They brought gifts, ideas, questions, and sometimes even children of their own. They wanted to learn what the Varrock had learned, that humans were not perfect, not powerful, not superior, but they were willing to love the unloved, to teach the untaught, to walk beside those the galaxy had once cast aside, and that willingness changed everything. The Auran Council never returned, but their silence became irrelevant, because the future no longer belonged to them. It belonged to those who had chosen something better. The deadliest species had made a choice, not to conquer, not to command, but to trust, and the humans had answered not with fear, but with love. And in that answer the galaxy found its hope. The end.